He has said he's going to fight any leadership contest that comes up, by the way, so good luck to him.
What this means in practice is pretty wild. The really big question is, can Andy beat reform?
Hello, and welcome back to In the Room. Now, before we get started, we'd love it if you followed us on Instagram for the best bits of the show. Our handle there is @intheroom.pod.
You can also watch us on YouTube. Our channel is called In the Room Politics. And if you've got a burning question, or you just want to send us some fan mail, or there's something you'd like us to address on the pod, then you can email us on intheroom@independent.co.uk. We've really enjoyed your messages so far. Thank you so much.
Helen, I don't know about you, but from the outside anyway, it feels like things have really quietened down since a few weeks ago when nearly 100 Labour MPs said that they lost confidence in the Prime Minister. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, resigned, which sort of happened over the King's speech in quite a fraught way. And everyone was saying, you know, the Prime Minister's gone, and we were in this kind of fiery fury centre of everything being doom and gloom for Keir Starmer. But it doesn't really feel like that now.
Look, you're right. It feels a bit more like business as usual. So we've got Keir Starmer's been hosting Zelensky again and European leaders. So we've had lots of flags outside Downing Street. And this week we had the Prime Minister out and about making his usual junior ministerial level announcements, this time at Tech Week.
Burn.
Exactly. That is the worst thing I can say about a Prime Minister, a junior minister level announcement. But it does feel very much business as usual. Whether that is in fact true or whether we're in the calm before the storm, I think is a different thing. You know, we had the Mandelson files last week, as we talked about on last week's pod.
Yeah, the Mandelson files is a great example. To use a gaming term that I've become familiar with, the Prime Minister has become an NPC, a non-player character, in that, you know, that should have been fire and fury and everyone cross about it and people trying to dislodge him. But it's like, oh, there's no point anymore. Almost. It was quite surprising, actually, to see just how little reaction there was to the whole thing. In the meantime, it feels like every single journalist in Britain has gone up to the constituency of Makerfield. And, you know, Labour / Andy Burnham really are leading by 10 points there. In the meantime, I don't know if you saw this, but on Friday evening, Question Time was hosted in Makerfield, and they had all the candidates on for that. And it's like the first time really I've seen people properly pay attention to a Question Time show, because, you know, how many by-elections do we have where one of the kind of town hall hustings is actually televised on national TV on the BBC? Is anything going to happen? Because certainly from the outside, I don't know what you're hearing, you're a bit more plugged into Labour circles than I am. It just feels like there's this strange Cold War or truce where everyone's sort of downed tools or downed weapons anyway, and then is everything just going to hot up after the by-election?
It's an odd and unusual situation, as you say. And yeah, basically, quite a lot of big questions for our country are going to be resolved next Thursday in a by-election in Makerfield, which none of us had on our bingo card for 2026 either.
Yeah, no pressure, constituents of Makerfield.
So let's have a look at Andy Burnham from that Question Time in Makerfield, answering the question about whether he's going to run for Labour leader.
This is your moment. Just quickly, because I want to move on.
Well,
come on, this is the time.
I'm not somebody who gets ahead of myself. I can't do anything unless I'm lucky enough to get the support of people here. But if I get your support, I would seek to represent you at the highest possible level and give this constituency maximum power and influence. I think Wes Streeting seems to have launched a leadership contest. So if that is running, I would seek to join it. But I'd have to persuade members of the Parliament to Labour Party to do the same.
Cleo, I know you're having a lovely time. You're always having a lovely time. You love a by-election. You like a complicated political situation. What's the most interesting things coming out of the Makerfield focus groups?
I think the thing that can't be underestimated, and it seems clear that the people of Makerfield are feeling this too, is that this is no ordinary by-election. There is so much pressure on the decision that constituents there are deciding. So, you know, this is to decide whether Andy Burnham will quite possibly become Prime Minister. But it's also a genuine contest between Labour and Reform, which is kind of very important with the next general election in mind, because they'll be working out tactics and messaging and so forth on how they can beat each other when the time comes. And particularly for Reform, by the way, if they do lose this by-election to Andy Burnham, although they've become very, very close several times in by-elections recently, they haven't won they've never, close but no cigar, as they say, and that is quite a big question. They're a new party. That means they have not got their ground game. They've not got their machine quite right, because they keep coming in second, despite online and being very popular, and despite lots of newspapers talking them up and finding them very interesting and challenging.
Right, that's not translating to actual voters in an actual place turning up and putting a cross in the right ballot.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is really interesting about this by-election in particular is also the presence of Restore.
So this is really fascinating. If I think about the first time we talked about this by-election a few weeks ago, we talked a lot about it being a big battle of ideas between Reform and the Labour Party. We hadn't talked at all about Restore. And kind of up on the inside lane, or probably outside lane, as it probably more appropriately is, we've had Restore as a party really coming in and splitting the Reform vote, and that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, not to get too caught up in the various candidates here, but just a quick bit of polling that I think is useful, where it feels very gendered, this by-election. So Andy Burnham is 21 points ahead, according to Survation, amongst women, versus Robert Kenyon, who is the Reform candidate, who is 15 points ahead with men. But he is also, as often happens, and Reform do have a bit of a problem with vetting candidates, although they did field him in the 2024 general election, by the way, in this seat. He has some unfortunate comments in the past, which are, basically misogynistic. There's no other way to put it, including a classic, "I'm sexist, sorry, but I am." And Reform have done nothing to try and, the classic move would be to apologise and move on from that. And maybe they think, well, there's something to lean into here, and he sounds very honest, and people like that he's more rough and ready and he's not as polished as Andy Burnham. Who knows? Maybe there's a kind of cunning inside track here, but on the whole, I would say the better thing to do is to try and draw a line under this and not talk about it again. Restore are fielding a woman for their candidate. She's called Rebecca Shepherd, and I think that's kind of an interesting, they couldn't have known these sexist comments would have come out. But if you are not minded to vote Labour, and to be clear, the thing that is overwhelmingly obvious in the focus groups that are coming out, which, in general terms, don't always rely on focus groups for your information. But in a by-election, actually, that granular detail is really important.
Because it is the actual people who are actually voting in the actual election.
Correct. It's only a few thousand people that matter here. And, at the last count, 17% are undecided. So there's everything to play for. But the overwhelming message from almost every subsection is a visceral dislike of Keir Starmer and wanting him gone, which translate lots of different ways. Therefore, vote Andy Burnham. Therefore, vote Reform. Therefore, vote Restore.
Just on Restore, let's spend a second on Restore, partly because one of our team were like, who are Restore? And I slightly cattily said that I thought that they were the first of what we'll see as many kind of splitter parties from Reform. So Rupert Lowe, who's the leader of Restore, was originally a member of Reform. He's gone and set up this other political party which has a similar agenda but not exactly the same. He's been very judgmental of Nigel Farage accepting large amounts of money. Interestingly enough, and again, probably nobody really could have predicted that donation that Nigel Farage got from the cryptocurrency billionaire of £5 million has become an issue in this campaign. So Restore are a kind of more, and I say this very carefully, but a slightly more position themselves as a more ethical and credible version of Reform with a very similar agenda on migration. And the other thing I found interesting about Restore is that they have got a massive presence on things like Facebook. So it feels a bit to me like we were talking about this earlier, about kind of an echo of the Brexit campaign, where everyone's been looking in one direction, all of this national noise and all this stuff, and making predictions about what it's going to be like. And then very quietly, somebody has actually got an enormous following because he has Rupert Lowe, the leader of Restore, on Facebook, and he's been doing all sorts of things which massively burnishes his credentials with people who are unhappy, particularly on grooming gangs, all sorts of things.
The other thing I think is quite important here is Restore only exists because Rupert Lowe had a huge falling out with his colleagues at Reform, and he left and departed, and that included things like Zia Youssef reporting him to the police. It was pretty hardcore stuff, and I think this is very important for Reform. Here we are yet again with a candidate they perhaps have not vetted properly, and they have various councillors who've already left who were elected last month. if they are serious about actually becoming a party that can govern in the future, they're really going to have to work on their interpersonal dynamics, because Nigel Farage does have this habit of just wildly falling out with people in his own team, and indeed his own team falling out with each other. There was that very public departure from Zia Youssef last year when he then came back. And I think if Restore are actually able to generate votes out of this is a big problem for Reform, because just like everyone else, they're not necessarily very easy coalition. Who knows how many other of these groups could spring up as they have fallouts with Reform HQ, or indeed how much stronger Restore gets. So, they have to work on their ground game, they have to work on their campaigning machine and their grassroots. But actually, you have to have a decent team of people who are pointing in the right direction and are loyal to each other. And it could be a big problem ahead.
I think the other problem is that Reform have left a space wide open for Restore by having so many former Conservative ministers as part of their party. They've left the space for "we're not like them" anti-establishment wide open, and that's the space that Rupert Lowe is operating in. The other thing I say to you about the kind of reform and what you've just explained about immature party dynamics, we'll of course see that with the Greens too. So even though the Greens have been a party that have been around since, for a very, very long time, this massive influx of new members, new councillors, new people, that's going to take some shaking down too. So the notion that we've got these very settled runners and riders for the next election, we are nowhere near that.
Where everyone's polling at the moment, Labour, i.e. Andy Burnham, are about 49%. Then Reform are on about 39%. Restore at 8%. And just for context, the Greens and Lib Dems and Conservatives are around 1%, 2%. So 8% is quite a lot. And that is, guess what? Pretty much the gap between Reform and Labour. I'd love to hear your focus group quote on the £5 million donation.
So this was somebody in a focus group, a 58-year-old man who said, "Why are people with 4 teeth voting for someone with 7 yachts? It just doesn't make any sense." So that donation has got massive traction, that Nigel Farage has taken £5 million, and it puts them, it's a really helpful thing for people who are arguing against reform to be able to point that yet again it's Nigel Farage who is the elitist, out of touch. All the arguments that you think reform are making, they're having turned back against themselves by Restore. So that's an interesting dynamic.
I also think it's interesting that the by-election has, for reform has become more about Nigel Farage than for the local candidate, who people seem to know. He's a plumber. He was on a plumbing job when he found out he would be the candidate. He was elected to the council in May recently, and he was their candidate in the 2024 general election. But he's essentially not been allowed to speak. He did question time on Friday, like I said, but largely it's been about Nigel Farage. The opposite is true for Andy Burnham, where it's only really him speaking. In a normal campaign, the party's HQ would be saying to the local candidate, "You're doing this on this day, you're doing that on that day. The Chancellor will join you to go to a pub and pull a pint and talk about this, or the Health Secretary will visit a new hospital," or whatever. That is not happening on the Labour campaign at all. Andy Burnham and his team are holding it really tightly. I'm hearing that when the Cabinet do go up, they are not to knock on doors with Andy Burnham because they're all so unpopular.
Have to wear baseball caps and sunglasses.
He has a chat with them at HQ and they have a selfie together. But they do not go out door knocking with him. And again, lots of these Labour MPs are coming. This is interesting to talk about when we come to Labour leadership speculation. But lots and lots of members of the Parliamentary Labour Party are going up to Makerfield. They're doing door knocking themselves. They do not do it with Andy Burnham. They get a selfie with him. They go up and sort of pay homage to him. And then they are not involved in what he's actually trying to do on the ground. And it's quite an interesting pivot, I suppose, from here I am being very independent here. It's quite Johnsonian, I would say. And then eventually he's going to have to be one of these guys as well.
I don't think he's short of offers of help.
No,
that way. I suspect every single ambitious Labour-leading person in the country has suddenly found themselves conveniently in a place they'd not heard of until 6 weeks ago, just doing a bit of leafleting.
Yes, but the big question is, what will he do when Keir Starmer wants to go and generously help canvas and leaflet up there because, I said this at the beginning, one of the universal comments that is coming out of these focus groups is a dislike of Keir Starmer.
Yes, I think Andy might find something distracting for the Prime Minister to do in Manchester, perhaps.
You can stuff some envelopes in the back room.
It's interesting what you say about the kind of energy around the campaign as well. So this is kind of everybody's fighting for their lives. And there's been quite a lot of people saying, the Labour activists, proudly boasting about having bleeding knuckles from shoving leaflets through doors. I mean, the amount of paper that must be being distributed in Makerfield probably, would make the Green Party wince. No wonder they're on 1%.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, if anyone who has ever been canvassed will know this feeling, but in a by-election in particular, I mean, the pure volume of stuff you're getting through your letterbox is just so frustrating and tedious, and it's not even the time of year when you'd want to burn it. Or I guess it's barbecue weather coming up again, but yeah, it is. And actually, just having all these journalists up there and everyone suddenly really paying attention. It's a bit like a film or something where you've got all 6 weeks of everyone going completely bananas, wants to know what you think. Have you heard of Keir Starmer? Have you heard of Count Binface? All the rest of it, and then they're just going to disappear next Friday.
I think we should definitely, I'm so pleased we've got another shout out for the glorious Count Binface.
Yeah.
So you'd noticed just a little bit more on Keir Starmer, you'd noticed that in the I was disparaging about it being a junior minister level announcement that the Prime Minister made this week, but you had spotted another with your U-turn radar.
Yes. So in his London Tech Conference speech this week, he talked about let's call it a ban on social media platforms for under 16s, but inevitably it's a bit more complicated than that. It's not quite doing what Australia has done, where, by the way, it's been quite successful and it's universally popular, particularly among parents, which I'm sure you'll relate to. But he had this idea in his speech that he said to the tech platforms, listen, you've got 3 months to get yourself sorted before we will bring in, presumably following due process, a blanket rule on banning social media platforms, damaging social media platforms for young people, which is really to do with controls you could have on their phones and on their social media accounts to stop them sending or receiving nude images of themselves or other people.
And that's interesting, isn't it? So there's been lots of chat amongst, the Labour MPs that Keir Starmer is in legacy mode. Actually, he's really not. So we've seen Prime Ministers in legacy mode, and they do slightly the opposite of what Keir Starmer's doing at the moment. So this is quite a small announcement. A Prime Minister who's genuinely in hold my beer. I'm going to absolutely do everything I can. I'm going to run at this wall. I mean, even if it's just on the basis that just in case I'm not Prime Minister, we'll be doing so many big and bold things, I think. I mean, people have latterly really criticised the fact that one of the things Theresa May did literally the day before she stepped down as Prime Minister was create a net zero target. One of the biggest things that we've had in terms of decisions of the state was done literally with a pen on a Tuesday afternoon with no parliamentary scrutiny by a Prime Minister that had a list she was crashing through in the way that all of us like to crash through a list before we finish something, and she did that. So Prime Ministers in legacy mode tend to be absolutely hell for leather, knocking it out of the park, doing all sorts of really big things. It is interesting to me that isn't what we're seeing from Keir Starmer at the moment.
He has said he's going to fight any leadership contest that comes up, by the way, so good luck to him. And just a quick reminder for everybody, for all the chat about leadership contests, we aren't actually in one. So Andy Burnham said in that Question Time clip that Wes Streeting had triggered a leadership contest. He actually hasn't. He just resigned. He, as far as we can tell, he does not have the required 81 MPs to actually get the ball rolling. But unfortunately for Wes Streeting, he's already in the kind of Brutus stabbing caricature. So he has technically got the ball rolling, I guess, in like psychologically. But
in a slightly on and off and slightly unhelpful way. So I think there are three things. And the reason we're doing this deliberately this week rather than next week is it's a bit easier with a bit more clear water between us and the by-election to have a conversation, which is going to be harder the closer we get to it. But effectively, if you buy the argument, which most people in the Labour Party do, which is the really big question is, can Andy beat reform in Makerfield? And if he does, he ought to be the new Prime Minister, because that is the big question. The fight for Labour's life at the next election is going to be about Labour versus reform. So Andy ought to be the leader, or at least have a chance of doing it. So that question is going to be resolved one way or the other in quite a binary way next Thursday. Then it becomes, well, OK, should Andy Burnham just be crowned as the Labour leader or should there be a contest? And this weekend...
And how long should that contest be?
Crucially, yes. And this weekend, there was another question, which is the default. We love the rules, and we know that the Prime Minister loves the rules, and the Labour Party rules are such that the current leader is by default on the ballot paper. And Keir Starmer's team were out there briefing this weekend that he would be standing in an election were there to be a leadership contest. What this means in practice is pretty wild. So if you think about the times, and God knows as a country are we practiced in changing prime ministers on the move in recent times, but we've not had a prime minister putting themselves up for a leadership contest since John Major in 1995. And that was, to quote one of our, it was a different time, 1995. It was an extremely short election campaign. That's when John Major had told everybody to put up or shut up. And the other candidates were members of the cabinet, and there was a kind of gentleman's agreement that over, I think it was like 2 weeks, or it was a very, very short period of time. The MPs chose who it was, and there was a sort of gentlemanly decision not to really do any government business for a couple of weeks in order to get this thing resolved, and then they'd crack on again. If you have a leadership contest where the Prime Minister themselves is standing for election to the members of the Labour Party, you've got a whole host of really complicated questions about, well, can the Prime Minister suddenly start making massive policy announcements? Because are they doing that to try to win the hearts and minds of the Labour Party? And is taxpayers' resources and government business being distracted into this internal party fight, which is not proper? And it will be fiendishly, all the times I feel very sorry for the civil service, how on earth you manage a leadership contest where you potentially have, OK, Wes Streeting's resigned, he's not in the government. Anybody who wants to stand, presumably, has to also resign and not be in the government. But the guy who's leading the government is also on the ballot paper and he's not resigned, he's still there. And potentially this could drag on for months, theoretically, over the summer, of the Labour Party sort of eating itself in public.
Yes, and I know a thing or two about a political party technically governing and eating itself at the same time. I've seen this too, that there's a discussion about should Keir Starmer essentially stay in position and then they elect a new leader at the party conference in October, which we've discussed this before. You do not want to be airing your dirty laundry all summer, but also hostilities has essentially reopened between Iran and Israel this week again. The autumn that is coming and the winter that is coming is not good for us, and we need the summer for whoever is in power to really prepare as well as they possibly can, and fighting a leadership contest is not conducive to that. And also, by the way, just having a bit of a break, because this is an oppressive job. The Prime Minister is allowed a bit of a holiday. Or I've seen the kind of contrary, which is what we discussed a couple of weeks ago, which was you could have a situation where Andy Burnham, step one, wins the by-election, which is no easy feat. And then he could theoretically be Prime Minister in a few days after that, because if he has enough Labour MPs behind him and the Prime Minister doesn't, then that's just decided. If the Parliamentary Labour Party essentially unanimously decide to have Andy Burnham straight in position, why not? But I can see if you'll say the civil service or indeed the country.
You can see my little panicked face.
I can see you thinking, because I hope he's put some thought, his team put some thought into what the future might hold. But he'll be so anxious of seeming like he's sort of committing hubris. He won't want to be seeing or doing, measuring the curtains, as they say. Even a month would make a difference.
There is a worst of all worlds here, which is that you have a new Prime Minister who effectively has not had the time or the space or the energy to not repeat exactly the same mistakes that were made in 2024 when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. So if you
Which is arriving with that plan.
Well, so why are we here? We're here partly because, for lots and lots of different reasons, the Labour Party itself now recognises that it didn't really have a plan to govern in 2024, didn't really know what it's there for, hasn't actually been able to make the big changes that have persuaded its electorate or even its membership, like what the point of it is and what it's here for. The amount of really boring, practical things that need to be decided before you can become Prime Minister is I've written these lists before. They're quite long.
Yeah.
And just for all of us, you don't want a Prime Minister turning up extremely exhausted after a very contested by-election campaign, not having had enough time to think about what team he wants, what his agenda for government is, who he's going to put where, what instructions he's going to give them. All of these things are not the work of half an hour. It needs at kind of best a few weeks to settle these things. And if you think about transitions of power that have worked really well, and this is a bit me talking my own book, obviously, but if you think about Boris Johnson, who came in, just squeaked in before recess in 2019, I think it was literally the day before parliamentary recess that he took over, that I'd been working with him and his team for weeks before then. So we'd done access talks with the two shortlisted candidates of the leadership contest with Theresa May's permission. Mark Sedwell and I had spoken to Jeremy Hunt, we'd spoken to Boris Johnson, and then it became clear that Boris Johnson had won. We did a really intensive piece of work with him and his team to get ready for okay, sometimes really, where are you going to live?
Yeah.
Who's living with you? Which at that point wasn't entirely a straightforward question. And then what you doing with all these different jobs? What are the 3 things you want to achieve? How are we going to structure these things?
And we're leaving the European Union on the 31st of October.
There was that. It's this tiny administrative matter of leaving the European Union.
But it's not dissimilar. It's okay, of all these stressful things to be happening in your life, moving house, famously stressful.
Famously.
That's got to happen. You've just come off the back of this by-election, as you say. You've got a massive to-do list of just all the things that you can expect to happen. You've got to move your family down here from Manchester, where they're presumably quite happy. And you're now Prime Minister, and there are loads of big and scary things. And you sort of mentally have to change tack. He would go from by-election in Makerfield to potentially PMQs within 4 days or something. I mean, it is quite bananas.
It is quite bananas, but if we're not careful, there is a possibility that you end up in that sort of situation. And being Prime Minister is a job where there are other jobs like it, but not very many, that you have to take an extraordinary amount of decisions every day. So it's basically, this is the theory, but whether everybody practices exactly like this, we shall see. Has he got an intellectual framework, a setup, a system, a structure that's going to enable him to actually turn some of the Manchesterism ideas into the UK, governing of the UK?
So what would be, I keep hearing, and I have some sympathy for this, that people are quite keen to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that by getting rid of Keir Starmer and replacing him with Andy Burnham, you're not necessarily getting a better leader. I don't know if that's fair or not, or necessary. What is Manchesterism? There's lots of this discussion going on, but let's just say, I think the stable doors open and the horses bolted. Personally, on Keir Starmer, I think it's not if, it's when. From with your old hat on back in the Cabinet Office, if you were in that job and you were in charge of potentially welcoming a new Prime Minister, what would be the kind of perfect timeline for you?
So I think it would be better all round if it would be possible to have a new Prime Minister in place just before the summer recess. And then you'd have a new Prime Minister in place, you'd have the whole of the summer without Parliament, which does, quite rightly, by the way, creates a lot of work for ministers because you've got to account to Parliament and answer questions and all that stuff. So you have a little bit of breathing space where those kind of 6 weeks before Parliament comes back again in the autumn, you can use to make sure your ministers have really understood their jobs. You've got a very clear, very intense period of work. Good luck, everyone's summer holidays, where you can get ready to basically start doing things differently in September. Because one of the things that you need to start thinking about, and there hasn't been enough thinking about this, is stop putting one foot in front of the other from left to right. Start thinking from right to left. So, and this is the mindset, by the way, that gets you to, it's already too late. But if you think about, we had a general election in July 2024, right? So the parliamentary term runs out in July 2029. That's 5 years. Well, practically speaking, the last 6 months of a parliament are an election campaign. We don't, by the way, have a fixed term Parliament Act anymore, so the election can be called at any point, and it might be that politically you decide to do it a bit sooner. So the maximum amount of time you have is 5 years, but knock 6 months off that, so that takes you to kind of Christmas 2028 is the last time you can really make any meaningful decisions which might make a difference to the election.
So it's 2.5 years from now, basically.
Yeah, and then if you think, well, people have to feel that things are different and stuff has changed, not just be told that hope is coming, particularly after what we've just been through. So if you, even with the best will in the world, it takes, let's say, a year, maybe, and that's if you're really fast, for you to change something like make a law different, put something in place, and for people to actually see it, that takes you back to 2027. Oh, hang on a second, that's the end of this year.
Yeah.
So you kind of need to know and have decided what you want to do and be actually doing the thing this autumn in order to make a difference to the outcome of the next election.
Which contrasts quite sharply with telling big tech, you've got 3 months before I'm going to really come round and wag my finger at you.
How about just today? And that's the other thing that I think that we've spent a lot of time, and obviously the Labour Party, all political parties love to spend a lot of time on their own internal machinations and who's up and who's down and all of those things. The other thing that's happened in recent weeks is that the former Prime Minister, Labour's most successful Prime Minister, our friend Tony Blair.
I was about to say, your diagnosis sounds similar to Sir Tony.
Well, I mean, if only it's very flattering to suggest so, Cleo. But Tony Blair published an essay where he was focusing on not just kind of all of this, who's up and who's down and who should be the Prime Minister, but the radical notion that you should care about what. Like not just who, but what is the Labour Party here for? What are the big challenges of our age? And look, you don't have to agree with Tony Blair. The Labour Party loves to disagree with Tony Blair because they love nothing more than knocking their most successful leader. If you look at the response that you got from both...
Like 3 days later, though.
It was really disappointing. It didn't engage with any of the substance. It tried to make out that Tony Blair doesn't really understand government and that Keir Starmer does have a superior understanding of government, which I think even Keir Starmer's friends would think is a bit of a push. Not least is actually because one of the things that Tony Blair's done after power in the UK is spend an awful lot of time thinking about advising other governments. And the guy, you can criticise him for a lot of things, but not understanding power is not one of them. The
Tony Blair Institute is very reputable. I mean, so he had a 10-point plan in there, and it was things like radical reform and deregulation of the planning system, prioritise cheaper energy over net zero, fundamental reform of welfare. And Keir Starmer said, I'll be blunt, it is simply not a credible depiction of how government works. Government is not a to-do list. You cannot just tick off the issues one by one.
Do you know what?
You can.
Government is
process must be followed.
But actually, government is a to-do. I don't want to be that guy, but government is a to-do list. It's like, what am I doing today?
Yeah.
And then can I tick off these issues one by one? I mean, you can't solve all the problems of the known universe by ticking off the issues, but you sure as hell can achieve absolutely nothing if you don't tick anything off.
Yeah, it was really surprising. And but then Tony Blair was very quick to go out on the Today programme and say, I'm not saying a change of leader is important, but it is worse than that, because I think I've picked this up myself, actually. People don't feel like things are going well. And there are some people who say, probably rightly, there's no point getting rid of Keir Starmer because things won't change. And there are people who say, we just got to get rid of him because how could it be worse, perhaps? But every single member of the cabinet of the Labour Party should be reading that essay and should be thinking really carefully.
Well, and disagreeing with it on the terms at which it's set out. So actually, the most disappointing response I think I saw was that Wes Streeting very quickly afterwards, I mean, to the extent that you're like, well, did you read all 5,000 words?
He's in leadership mode, honey.
He's in leadership mode. Well, so in which case he really doubled down on that, because his response was mainly about the Iraq war. And you think, who are you talking to? It wasn't about engaging with any of the substance of these quite interesting and thought-provoking ideas about how our whole country, economy, growth might be better, the things that definitely need fixing, the things that don't, which you can definitely have an argument about. Instead of which he pivoted to, let's have another crack at Tony Blair for the Iraq war. And by the way, Wes Streeting didn't support the Iraq war in 2003. It's like, I think he was still at school.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it made a massive difference.
But it also sits weirdly alongside, Wes Streeting's messages with Peter Mandelson that we talked about last week. I think it's just an uncomfortable situation where I think so many members of the Parliamentary Labour Party will disagree with what Tony Blair said in that essay, not least because it's just not where they are on things. It's like Pat McFadden's text to Mandelson again, where he's talking about taxing people to spend on welfare and things like that. Like, a lot of the decisions from the last 2 years are really where the heart of some of the, particularly the new Labour intake are. and they sit so, Tony Blair is a bogeyman for them. And one of the things I thought was so interesting is how many Conservatives I know who read the essay and were like,
yes,
this is great. let's just make this our 10-point plan
those
now.
two things may be related,
Yeah.
I suspect. But I thought the one person who did, in fact, as you might expect, handle this slightly more elegantly was Andy Burnham himself, who didn't entirely demolish the list of things, because actually the list of things are interesting and thought-provoking, but did say that he felt that the argument didn't go to what was on the doorsteps of Makerfield, which is about cost of living.
Yeah.
Actually, the meta thing for the Tony Blair essay is that the way in which we are governing our country, the decisions we're taking, all of this stuff is not working for people.
Yeah.
But being the Tony Blair Institute, it's not anchored enough in poverty and opportunity and all of the things that actually, if Tony Blair was a real life politician these days, he would be talking much more about. So Andy didn't close the door to doing all of these things or listening. He just was very hard on, this is not what I'm hearing people really care about right now.
Yeah, and actually one of the things I thought he did very well was, because this is also what I think, so Andy,
so surprising.
You're bang on.
So surprising. We agree with ourselves yet again.
But Andy Burnham linked it back to the 2008 crash and how that has affected living standards ever since. And, we're about to come up to the 10-year anniversary of Brexit. And this is the thing I always talk about, which is, the Brexit vote is not a cause. As much as you may think so, it's not a cause of our problems. It is a reaction to what has happened to people's living standards and our public services since the 2008 crash. And Andy Burnham, Labour candidate in Makerfield, was bang on the money with that one.
In the same way, the 2008 crash wasn't a kind of abstract incident like, a great plague or something. We've had one of those. It was showing people the reality of the world as it had got, so that actually the kind of fundamental baked-in inequality that there was in the way that the finance system was working, that's what 2008 is. It's not kind of a random incident that happened. It's another thing which is a symptom, and it is a cause of some of the things that follow, but it's a symptom of how far away from the kind of more benign, regulated version of post-war consensus capitalism, including in the States with philanthropy and all these things, that we used to have that we don't have anymore. And we've been kind of flailing about collectively ever since.
Which is also, by the way, to link this back to Nigel Farage, what he should be careful of. The focus group quote, 47 yachts, TLDR, is quite resonant in that. He worked in the city, and this crypto stuff for lots of people feels like another vague sort of city money financial markets thing, which doesn't feel quite fair to everybody. And I think Farage, who's always been able to run as a slightly Robin Hood people's champion on this stuff, could get outflanked by Andy Burnham. But we will know for sure next week when the votes in the by-election come out. And just a reminder, Nigel Farage is not actually standing as the candidate. There is a Reform candidate, but he's just the mouthpiece, as per.
And there is always the possibility that Andy Burnham doesn't win. So most of this conversation,
yes, let's game that out, shall we?
So we've been assuming that Andy Burnham will win. If he doesn't win, I think you've got all bets are off in terms of the Labour leadership, because it's unlikely, obviously, that Andy Burnham can then participate. He's not going to do a chicken run to another seat and have another go. I think that is impossible for him to do. So he'll go back to being the Manchester mayor and see what happens next. I don't think Wes Streeting, from the sounds of things, has got anything like the numbers to launch a attack. And whether even if he can launch an attack, is he going to successfully become the new leader and prime minister? Really doubt it.
Yeah.
So we're back into kind of Angela Rayner territory. Maybe she will throw her hat in the ring, but
and by talking her up, we've ruined Shabana Mahmood's chances.
Anybody that we like, there's no chance of that. And so it's actually much more likely that we might be on reset number, I don't know what would be on now, 7?
Nice biblical magic number in 7, so he is hoping.
So we might be onto Keir Starmer staying put, and there we go. That's our summer. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Remember to follow the show on your podcast player and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed it.
And please do email us with your feedback and questions. We are in the room at independent.co.uk. We really love getting your incredibly nice messages and useful feedback. And if you're listening on Spotify, you can leave little comments under the episode, which we also like to have a look at. And you can keep up with all the best bits of the pod on Instagram at intheroom.pod.
This podcast is part of the Independent Podcast Network and produced in association with Next Chapter Studios.
The executive producers are Carrie Rose and Olivia Foster, and the producer is Sam Durham.
And a special mention to our content editor, Maya Ranushka, our video editor, Vali Raza, and our videographer, Dan Faber.
Thanks for listening, and see you next week.